The best way I thought to frame my part of the discussion was simply to take you through my own journey, both on a personal level and a professional level, in terms of how I came to even begin to understand what systemic discrimination means. It's taken me, I can say, fairly a lifetime to even touch upon the tip of the iceberg of what systemic discrimination is. In terms of systemic discrimination, as I see it, it's something that lurks just beneath the surface of our institutions and our society. It is a concept where we often see the symptoms, but we rarely see the root causes. It is what I would describe as a multi-headed hydra, which is pernicious, but at the same time, invisible. It invades the way we think, it invades the way we act, and it invades our values and how we see and look upon the world. To recognize systemic discrimination, which for me has been a lifelong journey, even being an immigrant, even seeing the world from a different lens, you have to really change your worldview. You have to change how you act. And that's why it's so difficult. It's very difficult to change how you think. It's very difficult to change how you value society and different aspects of what we do each day. And of course, systemic discrimination is tough to grapple with because it means different things to different people. And to some people, it means nothing at all. It's a threat when you say those two words in tandem. So it's a nebulous topic. It's a tough topic to grapple with. And that's why I thought perhaps just sharing my journey would be the easiest way to connect with you in terms of systemic discrimination. And I'll begin with that in terms of my journey of understanding. I grew up in an immigrant family with a very black and white view of the world. My parents came to this country for a better life. And they wanted to embrace the values of Canada, and they wanted to embrace the laws and the rules and all of that. And that's what we were taught growing up. There was good guys, there were bad guys, there was white hats, and there were black hats. My father used to love Western movies, and even in those Westerns, you'd see the cowboys and you'd see the Indians, and you knew who the good guys were and who the bad guys were. And what child does not want to be on the side of the good guys? Who doesn't want to wear the white hat as opposed to the black hat? And so with this type of thinking ingrained in me from a very early age, I decided I wanted to become a police officer. I wanted to be a member of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police. I wanted to wear the red serge, and I wanted to put bad guys, quote unquote, in jail. That was my calling, I felt. And I never thought in a million years that I could ever defend or be on the side of bad guys, which of course is what I do now today for a living. I thought anything of that nature would be just absolutely outlandish, absolutely crazy. So when I look back on my understanding and how I came to have some understanding of systemic discrimination, I look back on those early years first. What is systemic discrimination? It is something that becomes a part of your DNA from a very early age. It is the values we are taught in our own households. It is the specific window we are taught to gaze upon the world from a very early age. And it's about seeing the world in a very black and white way. There's good guys, there's bad guys, there's us, and then there's them. There's criminals and there's law-abiding citizens. And certainly I grew up with that very black and white mentality. And so as I went through undergrad at Simon Fraser University and decided I wanted to still have that thought of being a police officer, I realized I wasn't quite ready to get into the real world, have a mortgage, have real responsibility. So I thought, what's the next best thing to being a police officer? And I thought, okay, well, Crown prosecuting attorney. So I ended up going to law school, and that was the path I embarked upon. Now, in terms of my Crown prosecution career and how that impacted my understanding of systemic discrimination, I worked at the Department of Justice in Vancouver, 222 Main Street, which at that time was probably the busiest courthouse east of Toronto. It's also right in the heart of the downtown east side of Vancouver, next to probably the biggest open air drug market in Canada. Now, for an immigrant kid from the suburbs going into this venue, it was, I can say, quite a shocking experience. I witnessed essentially what seemed to be third world conditions in a first world country. And as I walked those cobblestone streets of Gastown to the courthouse, I looked around wide-eyed. I noticed that many, perhaps even the majority of the faces that I saw were Indigenous. I noticed that addiction and mental health clearly appeared to be significant issues in this area. But everyone was walking around as if there was nothing to see. Everyone was walking around as if this, what appeared to be a war zone, was the most normal thing in the world. And then after a while, so did I. I just became used to it. It became part of my daily routine. And so when I look back on my thought process and I ask myself, what is systemic discrimination? It's the acceptance of the status quo, no matter how horrible it is when viewed objectively. Because when you accept it, you then normalize it. And that's exactly what I was doing when I was embarking upon my career as a prosecutor. But I felt deep down inside of me, something seemed wrong. Something didn't quite add up. I had a feeling that this is not right, although it didn't quite reach my thought process at that stage in a full manner. So I began my job as a Crown prosecutor. I'm bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, prosecuting primarily drug offenses, firearms, those kinds of things. And I felt I was really doing my calling. I was the good guy. I had my white hat on. I was putting the bad guys in jail. And my typical day would be dealing with a drug-addicted individual, often Indigenous, who would sell one rock of crack cocaine to an undercover officer. And these are very elaborate projects, lots of officers involved, observation posts. And I would go to court after they're arrested, and they would now be in my forum. This was my house, so to speak. And I had my marching orders from Ottawa, and I would seek their detention because by the time they got to me, they already had a record that was a mile long, primarily petty offenses, possessions, breaches of bail and probation. And because their record was so long, the presiding judge would typically detain them. They would not get bail. And then they would come back to me again when they wanted to plead guilty because they wanted to get out of jail. And I would ask for a first offense, a 3-month jail sentence. And I was told, or my marching orders were, that it didn't matter what the circumstances were, their personal circumstances, how small the amount that was sold, whether they were addicted or not, whether they were Indigenous, I had to ask for jail. And what I felt quite good, actually. I was putting drug traffickers in jail. I was putting bad guys in jail. I felt really good about what I was doing. And then I started to notice something. I started to notice when I'd go into my courthouse a couple months later, the same name would appear and the same face would appear back in the docket, or the doc, I should say. And I would say, well, clearly this individual has not learned their lesson. So now I'm going to ask for their detention again. And now I'm going to ask for an even bigger jail sentence. Maybe they'll learn the second time because they've gone to jail for a longer period of time. And it would go in that cycle. So it'd go from a 3-month sentence. I would ask then for a 4-month sentence, then a 6-month sentence, a 12-month sentence. And guess what happened? Well, I would see the same name and the same face all over again, no matter how high of a sentence I asked for, no matter how many times they were detained. The same name and the same faces. And after a while, some of these individuals, even came to recognize and know me. Hey, it's Mr. Dhanu, the Crown prosecutor. Ironically, some of them would go on to be my clients as a defense attorney because they thought I did such a good job putting them in jail. So I would later represent these individuals. So I asked myself, when I look back, what is systemic discrimination? It's an institutionalized way of doing things that perpetuates disadvantage among a certain group of people. There was this whole monolithic system that I was now a cog or a part of that picked on a certain group of people more than others without taking into account their background, their history, or why they were doing what they were doing. It was a very black and white view, good guys and bad guys, the exact same mentality I had been raised with. Now, At that time, even as a Crown prosecutor, after law school, after an undergraduate degree, I still did not understand systemic discrimination. I was part of that whole machine. Even as an immigrant, I didn't get it. But I still felt something was wrong. Something wasn't right here. Something wasn't adding up. Why are these people coming back over and over? I didn't feel as if I was helping society. I didn't feel as if I was helping my fellow man. I didn't feel as if I was helping my own soul, quite frankly. In terms of my journey, the other aspect that was important to me was prosecuting my own communities. I wasn't just prosecuting Indigenous peoples, I was prosecuting members of the Indo-Canadian community. Now, I should have known something was wrong when I put all this hard work in, went to law school. I came home proud. I'd landed a job at the Department of Justice. I'm a prosecuting attorney, and I came and told my mom, and she just kind of looked at me with disappointment and asked me in the Punjabi language, so you're going, just so I understand, you're going to be putting members of your own community in jail? And she shook her head and walked away. So I think she understood systemic discrimination better than I did at that time, despite her immigrant background. And that is the tough love of a Punjabi mother. The South Asian population now does many amazing things. They're very involved in politics, business, they're professionals, farming, you name it. But what do we see in the media all the time, primarily in terms of the Indo-Canadian population? It is South Asian children who are kids, young adults who become involved in gang violence and drug trafficking. Now, not that that is not a problem in the community. It is a problem in the community, but it is the majority of what we see. It doesn't reflect the community in terms of what the community is doing as a whole. And I, like most people, even despite being an immigrant, despite being part of the community, was influenced by the media. So when I saw these kids, these young Indo-Canadian kids coming to court who were charged with drug trafficking, who were charged with possessing firearms, what did I do? I took that mentality that I took from the media and I threw the book at them. I didn't try to understand why their path was different than my path, why I was prosecuting them and why they were in cells. I simply thought, well, look, I came from an immigrant background. I'm being a good guy. Why aren't these people good guys? So what then, when I look back, is systemic discrimination to me? It's what we hear in the traditional media, what we hear in social media, what we adopt in terms of the media noise that is all around us, and how that becomes a part of our thinking and our values. And I think it's really important to recognize the influence that media has in terms of how we perceive the world, especially now in this polarized environment that we live in. So at the end of the day, experiencing all of this through my immigrant lens, I still, at this stage, did not understand systemic discrimination, even after a few years as a prosecuting attorney. But I did understand that I felt something wasn't right. And I felt I wasn't being fulfilled in terms of what I thought being a good guy was. So I left the Crown Prosecution Service and I became a criminal defense attorney. I knew something was wrong. I knew I had to begin a new journey. And I began to see clients from all walks of life, Indigenous, immigrant, every different sphere, every different social strata. And I began to look into their background. I began to learn their stories. I began to look at the root causes of why they were doing what they were doing, because that was now my job as a defense attorney. And I began to see the role that systemic discrimination played in their lives and why they were now in my office. And that's when the pieces of the puzzle all started to come together. A light bulb went on in my head in terms of how I had grown up, how I was raised, my experience as a Crown prosecuting attorney, why I left, and now understanding their stories, I began just to understand the cusp about what systemic discrimination is and how it is so prevalent in our society. And to be frank, I'm still learning each and every day, and I'm looking forward to learning from Judge Gerald Moran and Kathleen Roussel as well. And that essentially is my journey in terms of systemic discrimination. And I'm looking forward to keeping learning and doing something about it as well.